Okay, so it is just on 8:45. So welcome everyone to the 2021 MERC conference. My name is Tab and I shall be your MC for the welcome events. And they'll be starting now at 8:45. And just a reminder for you as well that the welcome events for the conference, they're being recorded and they're going to be up on the website at the conclusion of the conference. And do join us as well in the conversation on Twitter around the conference using the hashtag MERC Conference 2021 and tagging us at MERC_education. First, an acknowledgement of country. I pay my respects to the peoples of the Kulin Nations on whose traditional estates I speak on today, to their ancestors, and to the children who we are educating into the future. I also acknowledge other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present. Now, for a quick welcome from us at the current MERC Leadership team. So the current MERC Leadership team are Amar, myself, Sweta, Queena, and Lem. We look forward to interacting with you all at this virtual event in the coming Zoom sessions, and of course via Twitter. So, who are we? Who are the MERC Conveners? We're going to give you some background information now just to start off. So, MERC, what is it? It's the acronym for the Monash Education Research Community. We are a friendly peer support community for education and psychology HDRs at Monash University. Each year, the education faculty selects a handful of MERC conveners from expressions of interest from current education and psychology HDRs. This year's MERC conveners, also known as the MERC Leadership Team, are Amar, Tab, Queena, Sweta, and Lem. And our role is to plan academic and social events for MERC. As to who can join MERC, well, if you are a current Monash Education or Psychology HDR, then you are already a part of MERC. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at MERC_education to keep up to date with upcoming MERC activities and events. And if you are a Monash HDR, and you would like to be a MERC convener in 2022, the Education Graduate Research Office normally seeks expressions of interest in late 2021 to early 2022 via email. If you would like any additional information about becoming a MERC convener, then you can ask us, the current MERC conveners. Just drop us an email or send us a DM via Twitter. Or you can contact the Faculty of Education's Graduate Research Office. Now, about the MERC conference. Well, what is it? The MERC conference is the major event that we plan as part of our role as MERC conveners. It's an annual event that is held to coincide with Spring School, which this year bookends the MERC conference. The conference is designed to bring together education and psychology HDRs and academics, so that HDRs can present their research to others. The MERC conference is beneficial because it allows for meaningful discussions to be generated between HDRs and academics from Monash and elsewhere, thus enabling valuable connections to be forged between members of the Monash Education Research Community. This year's conference theme is Embracing Adaptability and Transformation in Research. We shall go on now and explain the meaning behind this theme to you. As previously mentioned, this year's conference theme will be Embracing Adaptability and Transformation in Research. This theme was inspired by the many challenges associated with the COVID-19 pandemic and the need for many of us to adapt and transform many aspects of our research practice. In terms of this year's conference, we have also adapted and transformed the way in which this conference has been planned and run as a result of these challenging times. For instance, we have adapted the conference sub-themes to reflect some of the ways in which we have all adapted or transformed our research practice. we have adapted the conference format from our original conception of a hybrid event to a fully online event. We have adapted the types of activities to be done at the conference to a more online-based activity. And finally, the way in which we will all network and forge new connections with others has been transformed as a result of us all being online. As for what is happening during the conference, we have a great program for you. After our welcome events this morning, which includes speeches from the fabulous Professor Mandy Berry and Dr. Bodean Hedwards, we shall break for morning tea at 10:30 a.m, or from 10 to 10:30 a.m. After this, we shall have the morning parallel presentations, where 20 HDRs will be presenting their research in the sub-themes on your screen. To access the Zoom link for these presentations, please go to our conference website. We shall then have a break for lunch, and then we'll return using the same Zoom link for the afternoon parallel presentations, where another 20 HDRs will be presenting their research in the sub-themes on your screen. The Zoom link for these can also be found on the conference website. We shall then have a short break for afternoon tea, and then return for our closing events. These will consist of our feature panel of past Monash PhD students and will be chaired by our Dean, Professor Viv Ellis. And to wrap up the day, Professor Ellis will give a closing speech. The link for the closing events is the same link you have used to access the welcome events. And this link is also up on our MERC conference website for your reference. And do be sure to join the conversation about the MERC conference via Twitter using the hashtag MERCconference2021 and tagging us at MERC_education. Regarding the conference parallel presentation sessions, this is how you can access your desired presentation session. As mentioned previously, the session timings are as follows. The morning sessions will run from 10:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. AEST and consist of 20 HDRs presenting across 5 different sub-themes. The afternoon sessions will run from 1:30 to 3:30 p.m. AEST and also consist of 20 HDRs presenting across 5 different sub-themes. You can access your desired presentation session as follows. Click on the Zoom meeting link, which is on our conference website. The same link is being used for all parallel presentation sessions, but the sub-themes will be sorted into different breakout rooms. So once you log in, you can choose the sub-theme breakout room you wish to attend, and you can refer to the conference booklet on the website for a description of each sub-theme and the presenters' abstracts and bios. In terms of interacting with the presenters during the parallel presentations, you are welcome to use the chat function via Zoom to ask questions. The chat will be monitored by conference volunteers for each session. And if you need any assistance during the parallel presentations or in choosing your desired sub-theme, the MERC conveners and volunteers will be there to help you. As mentioned previously, one of the main things that we have adapted for the 2021 MERC conference is the activities you can participate in throughout the day. Throughout the day, you can participate in the MERC Conference Bingo, which will be done in an online format, and get some fantastic prizes for if you win. The instructions for how to play the MERC Conference Bingo are as follows. First, take a photo of each activity on the bingo squares. This is up on Twitter for you to access and has also been sent to Monash HDRs. After you've taken your photographs, choose one of the free apps such as PhotoGrid or Pic Collage to create a photo collage and then upload it to Twitter. Or you can directly upload your images to Twitter one by one. When you are uploading your images, make sure you number them to correspond with each box on the bingo board in order to be able to claim your prize. The first person to complete their bingo sheet and post it to Twitter using the hashtag MERCconference2021 and tagging us at MERC_education shall be awarded a prize. And to give you an idea of what your tweet could look like, here is how you can set up your post when claiming a row in the bingo. However, you don't need to complete the whole bingo sheet to be awarded a prize, We also have some smaller prizes on offer for those who wish to complete only one row of the sheet. I shall go through the sheet with you now for those who haven't seen it already and show you the prizes that are on offer and when they will be awarded. This is the bingo sheet that you can fill in throughout the day. Prizes will be awarded as follows. The first person to fill in row number 1, also known as bingo squares 1, 2 and 3, will be awarded a $30 voucher. The first person to fill in row number 2, also known as bingo squares 4, 5 and 6, will also be awarded a $30 voucher. And the first person to fill in the third row, also known as bingo squares 7, 8 and 9, will also be awarded a $30 voucher. We also have a grand prize on offer for the first person to fill in all 3 of the bingo rows. They will be awarded a $50 voucher. The prize winners will be announced after the conference concludes via Twitter. Thanks to our many wonderful Monash HDRs who are volunteering to help out at this year's conference. They will be assisting us with chairing the parallel presentation sessions, monitoring the Q&A portion of the parallel presentations, and running the virtual conference activities. You will find the names of all of our volunteers in the MERC conference booklet, which is up on our website. Thank you also to the numerous staff from Monash University's Faculty of Education and the Monash Graduate Association for their assistance in putting together this event. Your time and support is much appreciated. Thanks also to our conference sponsors for their support. Monash University, the Monash Education Faculty, and the Monash Graduate Association. This concludes the welcome from the MERC Leadership team, and I shall now hand over to our very special guest speakers. I shall first introduce our opening speaker, Professor Amanda Berry, who is a Professor of STEM Education and is the Deputy Dean of Research at Monash University's Faculty of Education. I shall now stop sharing this screen and I will start sharing Professor Berry's presentation.
Thank you very, very much. Great, thanks. And I'll just say next for the slides tab. That's great. So thanks for the introduction and thank you very much to the MERC team for the invitation to open this conference. I feel very honoured to be able to do this and really excited about the way in which you have reorganised this conference this year in order to be able to cope with the very demanding circumstances of the year. So I agree with you, it's a really well chosen theme that aligns both with the current COVID environment and actually what it means to be engaged in doing research, because it is all about adaptability and transformation, or at least it should be through that process of engaging in research. So next slide, please. So I'm zooming in from the city of Melbourne, and the traditional custodians of the land here are the Bunurong people and the Wurundjeri people, hard to say, of the Eastern Kulin Nation. And I want to acknowledge that these are the traditional owners of these lands. And I pay my respects through research, teaching and learning to the Wurundjeri and Bunurong elders and their past, present and future communities. Next, thanks. So hopefully you can see that okay. There's an Age article that goes back to August last year, lessons from the front line, here's what we've done right. So going back to early last year when we were experiencing the initial outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, health workers faced huge challenges about how to deal with this novel coronavirus, and that's in the name, because many of the standard kinds of routines of medical work had to be rethought because the way that the virus was transmitted didn't allow for those routines to be carried out safely. For example, these long established practices about listening to a patient's chest to be able to hear their breathing using a stethoscope didn't work anymore because the stethoscope could become contaminated with COVID. So health professionals had to figure out and adapt their practices in the face of a very different kind of environment. So you can see in the example here, you know, they were using ultrasounds or x-rays or blood tests instead, but they couldn't just carry on with the usual routines and had to figure out how to manage more or less on the spot. So of course, it wasn't only healthcare workers, all of us had to grapple with these changes to our usual environments and to figure out the things that we wanted to do and needed to do, which routines were going to stay in place and what needed to change to manage in the situation, both in our professional lives and also in our home lives. And that can be particularly disruptive, as we know, when you have long established ways of doing things, particularly when you have long established ways of doing things and the environment really hasn't interrupted those ways of doing things before. Thanks. So as researchers, of course, the world has changed very much for us. And just beginning this conference now is good to reflect on some of the ways in which you've chosen to respond as a researcher over the past year of dealing with COVID-19 and its effects. So obviously there's things that you've had to have changed, but there's probably some things that you've kept the same over the past year. For example, maybe you've had to find new ways to collect data. Maybe the data sources that you were hoping to be able to follow have evaporated. On the other hand, maybe you're still searching the literature in the same way that you were working before. Maybe you've had new ways of collaborating with others that you weren't expecting through electronic means, and so on and so on. So depending on the phase of research that you're in and the kind of research that you're doing, this situation may have had greater or lesser effects on your ability to do research, obviously. And also what you've changed or not changed may have something to do with your attitude and your openness towards learning and change, not just because of the circumstances in which you find yourself. Thanks. So research that I'm currently doing as part of an Australian Research Council grant with colleagues from Monash and Melbourne and Deakin universities is investigating this idea called adaptive expertise. And we're studying this particularly in the context of how primary teachers develop their adaptive expertise. So how they learn through problems and situations that they encounter in their work, in particularly in a kind of novel environment of combining mathematics and science teaching. So a Japanese researcher named Gyo Hatano studied differences between experts and novices. And from that research, he conceptualized two different kind of pathways of expertise development, one called routine expertise and the other one called adaptive expertise. And routine experts, they know how to carry out specific procedures very well. For instance, they learn how to use the stethoscope, they can use it over and over again and think about other more sophisticated procedures. For example, they have a great deal of procedural knowledge and they demonstrate great proficiency and efficiency when performing common tasks in a particular domain. So you have expertise and you have it in that particular area and you're able to do very efficiently and effectively the same thing over and over again. Adaptive experts, on the other hand, are able to use their knowledge flexibly depending on the circumstances to solve problems that emerge in a particular situation. And we'd say they have very good conceptual know-how compared with a routine expert. So going back to that simple example of the stethoscope, they figure out, if I want to get the same job done, but I don't have the available equipment, what am I going to be able to do instead? So in these novel situations, they can figure out how to problem solve. And we often say that this is an important way that people are able to learn. So Hatano's research also showed that in stable environments, that usually encourages routine expertise. There's nothing that kind of pushes you to have to do something differently. So people can be very efficient without having a deep conceptual understanding about what they're doing or whether they have to actually test the effectiveness of that approach. But as we know, especially recently, environments are changing, complex, changing environments that require us to be able to respond. And we just can't rely on that kind of routine expertise anymore, these kind of standard operating procedures. And this is a really key issue for all of us. More and more, we're going to be faced with these kinds of increasingly complex and changing environments that will need us to develop adaptive expertise to be able to navigate through and solve a lot of the problems that we face. And we have to, and I'm sure you'll recognise this, quickly make sense of a lot of new information and to be able to solve problems, small ones and bigger ones as well. So I want to connect the idea of adaptive expertise from the research that I'm doing and from what we've seen around to think about what that means in terms of the conference theme for the MERC conference and your role as developing researchers in a changing environment. So let's have a look at the next one. So here you've got a graph, sort of a figure really, that shows how Hatano and his colleague Inagaki described how expertise develops in terms of these routine and adaptive forms of expertise. So if you look along the horizontal axis, you see the development of a routine expert, mastering procedures along the way, becoming highly efficient. Thanks. So that you end up becoming a routine expert there. And if I think about this in the context of teaching, that might be that you know a particular topic, you know how to teach it, you teach it over and over the different years, you can predict almost what happens, and you develop this great sense of efficiency about how you go about doing that thing. And that's, as I said, very useful in an environment that doesn't change very much. Now, if you have a look at the vertical axis there where it says innovation, so as it climbs up towards the top, actually the top of that says frustrated novice. So this is the kind of person who's constantly innovating and changing that, what they're doing all the time. And so that idea of the frustrated novice is not particularly helpful. Let's say an example, you decide you're always going to do something differently over being able to get some routines in place before you start to be able to innovate. So an adaptive expert, and you'll be able to see, yeah, thanks, Tab. Adaptive expert is able to balance efficiency and innovation. They can perform flexibly and innovatively in new and unstructured situations by drawing on some of the routines to be able to invent new ways of solving unique problems. So they can think on their feet and they can make changes. And the development of adaptive expertise, as these researchers have found, develops through this thing called an optimal adaptability corridor. So that's the kind of thing that you're aiming for in terms of balancing innovation and efficiency. Again, learning routines, knowing when the routines have to become more flexible when you get presented with unusual, unexpected circumstances. Okay, so next slide, thanks. So what does this have to do with you as a research student? Well, as emerging researchers, you're both developing routines, building up your routine expertise, and then you're also being faced regularly with novel situations where you have to figure out how to proceed. And that might be a novel research situation, or it might also be the situation of being in a COVID environment where you're having to innovate about how you're able to proceed successfully. So you have to pay attention to both routine and adaptive expertise at the same time. And somehow you kind of have to find your way through this optimal adaptability corridor, balancing your own efficiency and innovation. Again, this is not something that's easy to do by yourself, and being part of a community really helps, working with supervisors and working with also your colleagues. And as you build up your research skills, you need to figure out sometimes there's important moments when what you want to happen has to change. And also in terms of keeping on practicing particular skills so that they do become routines. And one of the issues, particularly for routine expertise, is that it becomes so efficient that you actually get stuck in it. And it's really hard to move out of it because it feels so uncomfortable if you do that. And if the problem is that if you don't start moving out of those routines, you can't begin to see the world any differently. And in fact, as a research student, that's one of the things that you're aiming to do. So next slide, thanks. So what do we know about those people who are able to become adaptive experts? What are the sorts of knowledge that we have about what they do and what kind of characteristics they have? So they have highly developed metacognitive skills, that is, they're able to engage in reflection and mindfulness. So they become very conscious, for example, of the ways in which they think, potential biases that they bring to situations, and ways of learning through experience. Flexibility, so obviously they're able to integrate different aspects as they come across situations, able to change ideas as necessary. They can innovate when faced with a new situation. They can draw on things that they know. They have some kind of passion to learn, which includes persistently asking questions instead of kind of fixating on the first idea and deciding that that's the one that you're going to go with, and keeping a positive attitude towards learning. Obviously, things like willingness for risk-taking and intellectual creativity, where you're willing to try some things out, and when there's a possibility that you're not going to be successful. These are often easy things to think about, but they're much harder things to do when you're engaged in research. So next slide, thanks. So one of the really key overarching ideas that comes out through the development of adaptive expertise is the need to engage in productive struggle. Now that's pretty hard, because actually when you're in a struggle, you're not actually sure whether it's productive or not productive, but it's the idea of persisting through the struggle that really matters. So it's effortful learning that requires time and persistence and a willingness to acknowledge that not everything you do is going to lead to a nice, clean or correct, tidy answer. And that is so relevant for us to take on as researchers. And often the temptation is to latch on to the findings before we've really uncovered what the question is, or to hold on to favourite beliefs or ways of working or conceptual frames, because that's how we think things should be, or that's how things always have been. So that's why engaging with our colleagues becomes really important, engaging with supervisors, and allowing ourselves to question the sorts of things that might be becoming our routines and the importance of those, but also allowing ourselves to be in that moment of productive struggle, and realizing that that is also connected to learning, and that learning becomes a really essential part of how we move through and develop and transform our understanding as researchers. So of course the culture really matters, and a lot of this research also tells us, as I said before, in stable environments that encourage routine expertise, why would you even want to engage in that kind of productive struggle? So there has to be a culture where deep understanding is part of the norm, where people are willing to take that kind of risk and struggle. If on the other hand, getting things finished and efficiency becomes the main goal, then these ideas about struggling together are obviously not going to be ones that are valued and are more likely to be avoided. So setting up an environment that values learning above performance is really important as well. Thank you. Tab, next one. So enjoy the conference. I'm sure you will. You have a brilliant group of people who have put this experience together for you, with all sorts of ways to encourage you to engage in your own productive struggle. And what I want you to do through my opening is to provoke you to think a bit about what it means for you to embrace adaptability. What would it look like in this conference for you? How would you start to engage in the sessions if you are considering your own development of adaptive expertise, or the kinds of routines that you are mastering? And what does that mean in the longer term in terms of you as a researcher in your own development? So good luck with your productive struggle, and I'll see you in the optimum adaptability corridor very soon. Thanks, Tab.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to our opening speaker, Professor Amanda Berry, for giving such an inspirational opening speech and officially launching the MERC conference for 2021. Much appreciated. And as always, your insights are fascinating. It's given me a lot to think about, certainly. So I'm looking forward to applying some of that myself throughout the conference today. So I'm now going to introduce you to our keynote speaker for this year's conference, the amazing Dr. Bodean Hedwards, who is the Director of Arts, Immersion and Enterprise Initiative at Monash University's Faculty of Arts. Thank you so much for presenting this morning.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tabitha. It is absolutely fantastic to be here, and I'm incredibly pumped to be talking to you all today. But first, I too would like to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations, whose land I have the privilege of speaking to you all from today, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Good morning. Again, it is fantastic to be with you at the MERC conference. Thank you, Amanda, for your fantastic welcome and opening, and to the whole team behind bringing this fantastic conference together. Now, I don't have slides because I'm typically a pretty animated person, so you're just going to have to see the hands and all of the things happening over the course of my little chat today. What a time to be talking about adaptability and transformation in research, and particularly in the context of education. Now, I'm not even going to pretend that I don't have some big blue sky vision that I'm basically going to try and recruit you all into, and I'm going to state it right up front. We're at this really important intersection right now where we as educators and researchers in this sector have a really unique opportunity to shift the way we deliver education and understand the role of education, and particularly in the way that it will address some of the old and new global challenges that will no doubt pop up in the post-pandemic world. And this is why the research that you're doing right now is so important, because as educators and researchers, you will be on the front lines of, not to get, again, too big and philosophical about it too soon, but you will be on the front lines of mobilising the next generation of the leaders and the thinkers that will be working in this new world, be it from the classroom or through the research that you're doing that will ultimately help them do what they do best. Now, I have to say, I'm very new to the education sector, and how I landed here is a bit of a story that I like to share, largely because it's the story of how I came to believe so deeply in the work that I do now, which, I mean, given you're already in the education sector or you're interested in it, you've obviously all got to that point a lot quicker than I did. But I'll be very honest and say I never imagined that I would be working in a university or in education, because it is genuinely not where I thought I could have the most impact. And that was a really important driver, and still is a really important driver for my career and my study decisions. But I'll come back to the story part. So bear with me as I move around a little bit. But I really want to kind of frame the next little bit with a gold nugget of advice that I share with anyone and everyone that will listen. And it comes from my former PhD supervisor, Professor Sharon Pickering, who told me when I said to her after finishing my PhD that I didn't want to work for a university, that I wanted to pursue a career in the anti-slavery sector. She said, you can be part of this and that generation, not the this or that generation. And I share this because I now want to spend a bit of time not showing, if not convincing you that you can indeed do this and that, and that with this being the groundbreaking research that you're doing and being part of a movement of educators that will be responsible for literally shaping the next generation of leaders and thinkers and change makers. But before I keep going down that pathway, I'm going to take you back again and let me just kind of explain how I came to believe so deeply in that big blue sky vision that I hope you'll all join me with by the end of the presentation. So at the point of this encounter that I had with my PhD supervisor at a conference in Geelong, I found myself applying to do a PhD at Monash, but I had also already accepted a job with the Australian Institute of Criminology in Canberra. And I applied to do the PhD part-time alongside full-time work as a research officer. I was on my way to a career in research. That is where I was going. Now, my PhD was a passion project, and it was an issue that I cared so deeply about, and it needed to be because it took all of my weekends and weeknights for a very long time. But so when I was 18, I left my very small country town and I moved to India, where I lived with some Tibetan Buddhist nuns for the better part of 6 months, and many of whom had walked across the Himalayan mountain range to settle in India following the Cultural Revolution in China in the 1960s. And it was their stories and their experiences that prompted the focus of my PhD, largely because they were a migrant and refugee group that were left out of the discussions in irregular migration, and which had become the focus of my career at that point. And I cared really deeply about that issue. So this is really why I did the PhD. But this was all happening alongside my work at the Australian Institute of Criminology, where I had the opportunity to conduct research on a range of issues. So outlaw motorcycle gangs to human trafficking in the construction industry. And that last part was really where I decided to take my career, and I moved on into the anti-slavery sector. I moved to Perth and I started working for the Walk Free Foundation, which was an ambitious startup at the time that basically kind of focused, I guess, on ending modern slavery in a generation. So I moved into this sector. I joined the research team responsible for the Global Slavery Index. Now, that's a report that estimates the prevalence of different types of modern slavery around the world, and it assesses governments on what they're doing about it. Now, this role took me into classrooms in Vietnam to work with police from across Southeast Asia on how to use their law enforcement data to identify victims, to an MTV music festival in Myanmar to assess the impact of global information campaigns aimed at preventing human trafficking in remote parts of the country. So it was where I was going. That was the direction of my career. But after several years of trying to hold down a full-time job and a part-time PhD, I broke and I returned to Melbourne and to Monash to finish that up. And so it took me about another 18 months. But in case you're interested, on the 26th of October 2017, I submitted my thesis and I very swiftly boarded a plane, which seems like a novel idea at this point, I know, to a small island off the coast of Malaysia. I turned off my phone, I read books, I contemplated life, and that was how I was kind of just found myself at that point in time. Now, I share this story regularly because I want to emphasize that the opportunities do not always show up where or how you would expect. A week later, I returned to Melbourne and I had a message on my phone from my then PhD supervisor saying, call me, it's urgent. I called back and all I got was this kind of bits and pieces of an idea about this international education program that was going to change people's lives and that I needed to go meet with Sharon's team. Long story short, I turned up to the Clayton campus to meet with the new team. They had this idea. Okay, they wanted to build a program that would ensure that all students, regardless of their financial background, could access transformational international education opportunities. There were going to be multiple countries, thousands of students, and it was going to be launched in give or take 10 to 12 months. Now, I understood the impact that international education could have on someone's worldview. I grew up in a very small country town in New South Wales, and it's the kind of small town where it took give or take an hour or so to get to school and then an hour to get back, and it involved a bus and a very old ute that used to get stuck in third gear and it would stall at very inconvenient times along old dirt roads. I'd been to Melbourne and Sydney maybe a handful of times before I flew into the New Delhi airport, where, to anyone that has been to India, can attest to the feeling that it felt like there could easily have been more people in the arrivals lounge than in the whole of Australia. That first trip to India totally and completely changed my life and my worldview. So without a doubt, it helped me get to where I am today. But that experience isn't available to everyone. And this is despite the fact that a lot of the research shows that international experiences, particularly in the context of education, can improve grades, it can help graduates find more meaningful work sooner and increase earnings over the course of your career. It enhances our intercultural competency, communication skills, it shifts and changes worldviews, and ultimately it can help us see opportunities and careers that we may not have otherwise considered. But safe to say, I completely believed in the vision of the program that they were pitching to me, but I was reluctant to work at a university, and ultimately, and they know this, they were as reluctant to have a freshly minted PhD graduate on board as what I was to join the team. But I didn't have a job at the time, so I was like, oh, I'll come on and I'll help you until you find someone to do the job. And in my head, this was going to be a few months maximum. It's been 4 years. I'm still here, and since the launch, since its launch in 2018, the Global Immersion Guarantee Program, or GIG as it became known, has supported almost 1,000 undergraduate students to travel to either India, Indonesia, Italy, China, or Malaysia to learn from 100 different individual leaders and understand how they can contribute to solutions that will address ultimately the human impact on the environment. It's available to all undergraduate students, and really it was designed to remove those barriers that make it sometimes impossible to undertake international education programs. And in doing so, springboard students into an international network of businesses, of startups, of social enterprises, multinational corporations, and importantly, other young people that are leading solutions to challenges such as climate change, food and water security, gender inequality, poverty, and so on. I promise I'll get to the point and you'll see where I'm going with all of this. These issues, be it climate change, poverty, or modern slavery, for example, are the grand global challenges, as they're regularly referred to, that we as a generation are going to have to face. And this job, the job that I entered into, really drove home the fact that regardless of the degree, the career, or the background that I was coming from, or we're all coming from, we're going to have to navigate the impact of inaction on these issues. And I can feel the urgency of these issues, particularly at the beginning. And I think the frustration with such inaction now is also very clear and deeply felt. But the evidence and the polling shows that not everyone understands how or what they can realistically do to help. There is so much information on these issues that it's more often than not quite overwhelming, and as a result, immobilizing. Enter the educators. And this is where we come in. So over the course of the last 4 years since I joined Monash, where I was never going to work in education, I was never going to work at a university, I've had the opportunity to continue my research with UN Women and the International Labour Organization on this issue of human trafficking and modern slavery. Now, there are an estimated 40 million people in some form of slavery today. So I do this research because I care about the issues, and I fundamentally believe that we are going to need that evidence-based policy making in the future. And I do it because I feel like I have a responsibility to help address what is just one of these really complex and challenging issues of our time. But alongside this, I've had the opportunity to build what is now the multi-award-winning Global Immersion Guarantee Program and have an impact in ways that I genuinely never considered before that initial meeting. And I do this because I do really believe in the power of education and the incredible ideas and solutions that can be generated when you bring young people, or all people, from different backgrounds with different interests and careers together to think about these really big issues. My research and education efforts go hand in hand. It's not this or that, it is this and that. And when we want to think about transformation and adaptability, GIG is just the beginning. And it has led to opportunities that basically have helped expand this impact and provide opportunities for other students and young people. So, in terms of adaptability, to capitalise on the shift, this is just an example, to capitalise on the shift to a more virtual form of international engagement in light of the current circumstances. We launched a social enterprise challenge in the Indo-Pacific in January this year. It's a virtual startup incubator that so far has brought 300 students together from across Australia, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and many others to make, break, and, sorry, but for the rhyming, but recreate ideas for solutions to contemporary sustainability challenges. So from the first program of 100 students, 70% of which were young women, we know that students are still working together on their solutions to address some of those really local sustainability challenges. Education is no longer just about learning a technical skill or discipline. It's about how you apply. And I absolutely loved Professor Berry's presentation. I'm going to refer back to that because it's also about fostering this adaptive expertise. So in addition to this, if you're thinking about actually going into teaching, I personally would argue that the education that we do and the research that we do in this space is also about building a community of people that can genuinely help address some of these big issues that we are going to face in our generation. And if you are still unconvinced by my very impassioned statements, I know, then think about it this way. Since the beginning of the pandemic, 90% of the world's children have had their education disrupted. And for many, the pandemic will have not only disrupted their education, but ended it. So what impact would this have on climate change, for example? Well, a study has actually been, a study by the team at Project Drawdown, which I highly recommend as a fun education teaching tool, by the way, but they've shown that one of the most powerful levers available to avoid emissions growth is to ensure that women and girls are educated. And I won't go into all of it, but they argue and have shown that 85.42 gigatons of carbon dioxide, or the equivalent of greenhouse gases, and that's a lot, would be reduced or sequestered from the atmosphere by ensuring that girls in particular have access to quality education around the world. So the question is how we do that? Well, we start by leading research into the new and innovative ways that we can answer the big questions, like the ones I see in the titles of today's presentations. It was fantastic to see, flicking through the brief, to see presentations on the benefits of online education. I'm more than happy to talk to anyone about that. I'm a convert for that. But to teacher capacity building programs in Aceh in Indonesia, or to the modernising education in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, you're already asking the hard questions of how you do your research. So I can only encourage that you then take that expertise and knowledge into a classroom, or help those there to help apply it. Schools, universities, young people, old people, all we're full to the brim of ideas about how we address these issues like climate change and human trafficking and modern slavery. But we need students in classrooms, and we need innovative, adaptable educators to help them build the skills and the knowledge and the networks to help make the changes that we are going to need to see in the not too distant future. And again, just to draw on Professor Berry's presentation, there's nothing routine about the world we're in now. We're going to have to adapt and transform the way we understand and deliver education to do this. But I promise that your skills and expertise in the education sector will be more vital now than ever. So while we've taken a hit, and I really hope that everyone is doing okay in this very extended lockdown and you're all looking after yourself, and I know the next few years will probably be pretty hard, but it has presented us with a really cool opportunity, and I would argue the responsibility to expand the impact that our own education and research can have on the education of others. So all the very best for the conference. It looks fantastic, and congratulations again to everyone involved.
Okay, thank you so much to our keynote speaker, Dr. Bodean Hedwards, for your time and giving such a fantastic and inspirational keynote speech. It was actually, yeah, I've taken a full extensive set of notes myself on some of the things you were discussing, and it's really inspirational in terms of, thinking about where we are going in our current journeys as PhD students, thinking about how we can sort of adapt and transform the current education system into something that's more equitable and inclusive for others. And your story as well of how you came to be in this space is incredibly inspirational as well. And I think a lot of people, and from the comments I can see in the chat, a lot of people are feeling exactly the same way. So thank you so much for your time today. We really, really appreciate it.
You're most welcome. Good luck.
Thank you so much. And what's really nice is, hey, we get a little bit of an early morning tea break now, which is fabulous. So hopefully you can see my screen. We're going to have a little bit of a break until 10:30 in the morning. And during the break, please be sure to jump on Twitter. I can already see lots of comments and lots of discussion around our fabulous speeches from this morning on there. It's really, really great to see. Hopefully as well, you can engage in some of the online activities, including our virtual conference bingo. You can get geared up for that as well in the break. And we will see you at 10:30 for the parallel presentation sessions. The Zoom link for that is the meeting link, the Zoom meeting link, which will appear on the conference website, and it's already been sent to all of you attendees as well. So you can check your inboxes for that link too. And also, if you would like to come to the closing events, which will begin at 4 o'clock, the same link that we've used now for the webinar will be used again for the closing events. So thank you so much for attending, everyone, and we will see you at 10:30 for the parallel presentations. Goodbye, everyone.